They say you don't really know your children until they think you have nothing left to give them. My name is Matilda Rose Bennett. I am 73 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed my son loved me. I should start at the beginning. 42 years ago, I married a man named Arthur Bennett. He was a factory worker with calloused hands and dreams bigger than his paycheck. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Newark. The ceiling leaked. The pipes froze every winter. But Arthur would hold me at night and whisper, "One day, Matilda. One day we'll build something that lasts." He wasn't talking about a house. He was talking about a legacy. Arthur bought a single industrial sewing machine from a bankruptcy auction. $300. It was every penny we had saved in 2 years. He set it up in the basement of our building, and I learned to sew. Not delicate embroidery, industrial textile work, heavy canvas, military-grade fabric. My fingers bled for the first 6 months, but we got a contract, then another, then 12 more. By the time our son David was born, we had 3 employees and a small warehouse in Jersey City. By the time David graduated high school, we had 70 employees and 4 factories. By the time David got married, Bennett Textiles had 12 factories across 3 states and annual revenue of $42 million. Arthur died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer took him in 4 months. On his last night, he held my hand in the hospital and said, "Matilda, I'm leaving everything to you. Not because I don't love David, but because David loves money more than he'll ever love people. Don't let him take what we built and turn it into ash." Promised him. I didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. David seemed fine at first. He was sad at the funeral. He cried when they lowered the casket. He held me while I sobbed in the limousine. But 2 weeks later, he asked me about the will. "Mom," he said, sitting across from me in the lawyer's office, "I just want to make sure everything is organized. For your sake." That was the first lie. I stayed in the family estate, a $15 million property in Alpine, New Jersey, 12 bedrooms, a library with first edition books Arthur collected, gardens that took 3 full-time staff to maintain. I didn't need 12 bedrooms. I slept in the same room Arthur and I had shared for 30 years. But it was our home. It had our memories in every floorboard. David started visiting more often. First, I thought he was being a good son, checking on his grieving mother. But he never asked how I was feeling. He asked about the furnace, the roof, whether I was managing the stairs okay. His wife Sarah came with him. She walked through the house like an appraiser, running her fingers over the marble countertops, staring at the crown molding, whispering to David about resale value. I wasn't blind. I was grieving. There's a difference. Last Christmas Eve, David called me. "Mom, Sarah and I want to have a serious conversation with you tomorrow. Can we come by around 2?" I said yes. I thought maybe he wanted to tell me Sarah was pregnant. I thought maybe I'd finally be a grandmother. I baked cookies. I wore my best sweater. I put out Arthur's favorite brandy. They arrived at 2:15. Sarah didn't take her coat off. David didn't smile. They sat down on the couch across from me like I was a business meeting. "Mom," David began, and I noticed his voice had that smooth, fake-quality salesman use. "We've been worried about you." "Worried?" I asked. "About what?" Sarah jumped in. "You're forgetting things, Matilda. Last week you called David at 11 at night asking if he'd seen your reading glasses. They were on your head." I had called him at 7 in the evening. My glasses had been in the kitchen. She was lying. "And you left the stove on twice this month," David added. "The housekeeper found it. You could have burned the whole place down." I never used the stove. I had a chef who came 3 times a week to prepare meals. The stove hadn't been turned on in months. "This house is too big for you, Mom," David said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, doing his best impression of a concerned son. "You're isolated up here. You're lonely. You're declining." Declining. That word sat in the air like a stone. "We found a beautiful community for you," Sarah said, pulling out a glossy brochure from her purse. "Sunset Palms Senior Living. It's lovely. 24-hour medical staff. Activities. Other people your age." I took the brochure. I looked at the pictures. Small rooms with floral wallpaper, plastic chairs in a common area, old people staring blankly at a television. It wasn't a community. It was a waiting room for death. "I'm not going," I said quietly. David's jaw tightened. "Mom, this isn't a discussion. We've already spoken to Dr. Harrison. He agrees you need assisted living." "Dr. Harrison is my cardiologist," I said. "I saw him 2 weeks ago. He said I'm healthier than most 50-year-olds. Sarah's face flushed. "We meant your other doctor." I didn't have another doctor, but I realized in that moment they had found one who would say whatever they paid him to say. "I'm not going, David," I repeated, standing up. "This is my home. Your father and I built this. I'm staying." David stood up too. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at Sarah and she nodded. "We'll talk about this later, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "Get some rest." They left. And I knew something terrible was coming. 2 weeks later, I went to a charity luncheon in Manhattan. I was on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation. We met quarterly. I left the house at 10 a.m. I told my housekeeper, Maria, I'd be back by 4. I got home at 3:45. My key didn't work. I stood there on my own porch trying the key again and again, thinking maybe the lock was frozen. It was February. It was cold, but the lock wasn't frozen. It had been changed. I knocked on the door. No one answered. I walked around to the side entrance. That lock was changed too. I looked up at the windows of my bedroom. The curtains were open. I could see inside. My bed was still there, but my nightstand was gone. The photos of Arthur were gone. I walked back to the front of the house. That's when I saw them. 3 suitcases, sitting on the gravel driveway like discarded trash. They were mine. I opened the first one. My clothes, thrown in, not folded. The second one had Arthur's journals, the leather-bound notebooks he'd kept for 40 years. And the third suitcase had my jewelry box, my photo albums, and a Ziploc bag with my prescription medications. I heard a door open. I looked up. David was standing on the porch. Sarah was behind him, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed, watching me like I was a show. "Mom," David called out, his voice echoing in the cold air. "I tried calling you, but you didn't answer." I had left my phone charging in the kitchen. Inside the house I could no longer enter. "What is this, David?" I asked, my voice shaking. "This is an intervention, Mom," he said, stepping down off the porch but not coming close. "Dr. Harrison and Dr. Melvin both signed the competency evaluation. You're not capable of living alone anymore. I have power of attorney now. Legal guardianship." Power of attorney. Legal guardianship. Words that meant I was no longer a person. I was a problem to be managed. "The house is being listed on Monday," Sarah added from the porch, not even pretending to be sympathetic anymore. "The market is great right now. We'll get at least $20 million for it." "Your room at Sunset Palms is ready," David continued. "It's all paid for. You'll be safe there. You'll be taken care of." I looked at my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep every night when he had nightmares, the teenager I had driven to every baseball game, every debate competition, every college visit, the young man whose Ivy League education I had paid for in cash because Arthur and I didn't want him burdened with debt. And I realized I was looking at a stranger. "I'm not going, David," I said. "You don't have a choice," he said, pulling a folded stack of papers from his coat pocket. "It's already done." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I bent down. I picked up my 3 suitcases, and I walked to my car. As I loaded the suitcases into the trunk, I heard Sarah laugh. A high tinkling laugh. I looked back. She was holding a paint swatch. "Modern gray," she was saying to David. "It'll make the entryway look so much bigger." They were already redecorating. They hadn't even waited for me to leave the driveway. I got in the car. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, and then I started the engine, and I drove away from the house Arthur and I had built. But I didn't drive to Sunset Palms. I drove to the Hilton in Fort Lee. I checked into a suite. I sat by the window, looking out at the lights of the city. And I thought about what Arthur had said. David loves money more than he'll ever love people. Arthur had known. He had seen it. And he had protected me. Because David didn't know everything. The power of attorney he had wasn't fake. The doctors had signed real papers. The legal documents were valid. But they only covered one thing, my personal bank account. The account that had $63,000 in it. The account I used for groceries and donations and household expenses. What David didn't know, what Arthur had made sure David would never know, was that I wasn't just Matilda Bennett, widow. I was Matilda Rose Morgan Bennett, chairperson of the Morgan Arthur Holding Company, majority shareholder of Bennett Textiles, owner of the trusts, the subsidiaries, the offshore accounts, the real estate portfolios. Arthur hadn't left me the company in his will. He had put it in my name 30 years ago. David thought he was inheriting an empire. He didn't know the empire was never Arthur's to give. It was mine. I took out my phone. I called Peter Ashford, my chief financial officer. Peter had worked with Arthur and me for 26 years. He was the only person besides our lawyer who knew the full structure of our assets. Mrs. Bennett, Peter answered on the first ring. I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, Peter, I said, my voice steady now. It's time. Call in the markers. There was a pause. Then Peter said, All of them. All of them, I confirmed. You see, David had a secret he thought I didn't know. His architecture firm, Bennett Design Innovations, wasn't successful. It was hemorrhaging money. He'd taken out loans. Big loans. A $4 million line of credit from Northbridge Capital 3 years ago. Northbridge Capital had gone under in 2019. And when they did, guess who bought their debt portfolio at auction? The Morgan Arthur Holding Company. David owed me $4 million. And he didn't even know it. But that wasn't all. The penthouse Sarah loved so much. The $3 million apartment in Hoboken with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the roof deck. They'd bought it with a balloon mortgage. Due in full this March. The bank holding that mortgage, owned by a subsidiary I controlled. And the cars, the Tesla, the Range Rover, both leased. Through a dealership group I had a controlling stake in. Arthur used to say, Money isn't power, Matilda. Knowing where the money goes is power. I spent the weekend in that hotel room. I didn't call David. I didn't go to Sunset Palms. I worked. Peter and I coordinated everything. The foreclosure notices, the lease terminations, the immediate repayment demands. And then on Monday morning at 9 a.m., I drove back to the estate. There were cars everywhere. A black Mercedes, a Bentley. David was giving a tour to a potential buyer. I could see them through the window, walking through my living room, pointing at the fireplace Arthur and I had picked out together in Vermont. I parked at the end of the driveway. I waited. At 9:17 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled in behind me. Peter stepped out of the first one. My attorney Helen Rostova stepped out of the second. And a man in a sheriff's uniform stepped out of the third. We walked up to the house together. I didn't knock. Helen did. David opened the door, smiling, expecting another buyer. His smile died when he saw me. Mom, what are you doing here? You can't just. Mr. David Bennett, the sheriff interrupted. Yes, David said, his voice uncertain now. I'm here to serve you with an immediate foreclosure notice on behalf of Morgan Arthur Holdings for the property located at 442 Lakeview Terrace, Hoboken, New Jersey. You have 72 hours to vacate. David's face went white. What? That's my home. There's some mistake. There's no mistake, Helen said, stepping forward. You also have a repayment demand for the outstanding balance of $4,200,000 on your business line of credit, due immediately. And, Peter added, pulling out another envelope, termination notices for your vehicle leases, effective today. David stared at the papers. Then he looked at me. Mom, he whispered. What is this? I stepped closer, close enough that the buyer inside could hear me through the open door. This is me, David. The woman you thought was declining. The woman you thought couldn't manage her own life. The woman you locked out of her own home. You don't have the authority to. I don't, I said calmly. But the chairperson of Morgan Arthur Holdings does. And you're looking at her. The silence that fell over that driveway was so complete I could hear the wind in the trees. Sarah came running out of the house. David, what's happening? Who are these people? These people, I said, turning to her, are here to inform you that you have 1 hour to remove your personal belongings from this estate. After that, the locks will be changed. Again. You can't do this. Sarah screamed. David has power of attorney. He owns this house now. Helen stepped in. Mr. Bennett has power of attorney over Mrs. Bennett's personal checking account. This property, however, is owned by a corporate entity that Mrs. Bennett controls. The sale your husband attempted to execute was void from the moment he signed it. Sarah's face went from red to purple. She looked like she might have a stroke right there on the driveway. The potential buyer walked out, looking uncomfortable. I think I'll call my agent, he muttered, hurrying to his Bentley. David sank to his knees, actually got down on his knees on the gravel. Mom, please, he said, and his voice cracked. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I was worried about you. You were worried about my money, David. Not me. I can fix this, he said, tears running down his face now. I'll tear up the papers. You can move back in. We'll forget this ever happened. You had me declared incompetent, David. You paid doctors to lie. You changed the locks on my home while I was at a charity luncheon. You threw my things into suitcases like I was garbage. I'll make it right, he shouted. You can't, because some things once broken can never be fixed. And trust is one of them. Sarah was crying now too, but not sad tears. Angry, desperate tears. You're a monster, she screamed at me. You're destroying your own son. No, Sarah. I'm saving him. From you. And from himself. I turned to the sheriff. Give them 2 hours. Make sure they take only what belongs to them personally. Everything else stays. Yes, ma'am, he said. I walked back to my car. Peter and Helen followed. As I opened the car door, David called out one last time. Where am I supposed to go, Mom? We have nothing. I paused. I looked back at him. You have what I had 3 days ago, David. 3 suitcases and a lesson in humility. The difference is, I actually earned what was taken from me. You never earned anything in your life. I got in the car. I didn't look back as we drove away. But I want you to know what happened next. Because this story doesn't end with David sleeping in a motel. That would have been too kind. 3 days later, I bought Sunset Palms. The place David wanted to warehouse me. The facility where he planned to leave me to rot while he spent my money and lived in my house. I bought it. The building. The land. The whole operation. And then I moved in. Not as a patient. As the owner. I renovated my room. Tore down the floral wallpaper. Brought in my own furniture. Arthur's books. Our photos. I turned that tiny cell into a beautiful apartment. And then I did something else. I hired David. Not as a manager. Not as an administrator. As a janitor. Minimum wage. Night shift. You see, David couldn't get another job. His firm had collapsed. He had no references. His credit was destroyed. And when he tried to file for bankruptcy, he discovered that I owned the legal firm he'd hired. So he came to me, hat in hand, desperate. Please, Mom, he said. I need work. Any work. I have to feed Sarah. We're living in her parents' basement. I gave him a job. Every morning at 6 a.m., David Bennett arrives at Sunset Palms in his 15-year-old Honda. He clocks in. He puts on his uniform. And he cleans. He mops the floors. He empties the trash. He scrubs the toilets. And every morning at 7:30, I take my tea in the sunroom. The sunroom David has to clean. I sit in my chair by the window and I watch him work. He doesn't speak to me. He's not allowed to speak to residents while on duty. But he looks at me. And in his eyes, I see something I'd never seen before. Understanding. He understands now what it feels like to be powerless. To be invisible. To be nothing more than an inconvenience to the people who are supposed to love you. Sometimes when he's buffing the floors near my chair, I speak to him. David, I say softly. Did you remember to turn off the stove before you left this morning? You know how forgetful you can be. His hands tighten on the mop handle, but he doesn't respond. He just keeps cleaning. And I sip my tea. The same tea Arthur and I used to share every morning for 40 years. I'm not cruel. I haven't cut David off completely. He earns his paychecks. He has his dignity, or what's left of it. But I've made sure he understands something. You don't inherit respect. You don't inherit love. You earn them. Every single day. David lost his inheritance the moment he forgot that. And me? I'm 73 years old. I live in a nursing home. I drink my tea every morning and read Arthur's journals every night. And I am richer than I've ever been. Not in money, in peace. Because I learned what Arthur tried to tell me 5 years ago. Some legacies are built with bricks and mortar. Others are built with consequences. And mine? Mine will outlast us all. They say a daughter is a mother's heart, walking outside her body. But they don't tell you what happens when that heart stops beating for you and starts beating only for the cameras. My name is Matilda Rose Bennett, and I have spent 30 years ensuring my daughter, Chloe, never had to see the ugly side of the world. I ran a high-end estate management firm for 3 decades. I was the woman who made the impossible happen for the world's elite. If a billionaire wanted peonies in the middle of a desert winter, I found them. If a duchess needed a private villa in Tuscany cleared of every unauthorized person within an hour, I was the one who made the call. I lived in the shadows so Chloe could live in the sun. I taught her how to hold a crystal glass, how to walk as if the floor was lucky to have her weight upon it. I paid for the finest schools, the most expensive tutors, and the kind of life experiences that most people only see in glossy magazines. Chloe was my masterpiece, or so I thought. Last year, Chloe met Mark. Mark's family claimed to be old money from the North Shore. They talked about sailing in Newport and summers in the Hamptons. But as someone who actually manages old money, I saw the truth immediately. Mark's father wore rented suits. His mother, Genevieve, had 3 different credit cards declined at a charity brunch I hosted. They weren't elite. They were aesthetic elite. They lived for the image, while their bank accounts were a desert of high-interest debt and desperate lies. But Chloe was obsessed. She didn't want a marriage. She wanted an editorial event. The wedding was planned for the Pierre Lowell estate, a historic mansion in the Hudson Valley with gardens modeled after Versailles. The booking fee alone was $85,000. Mom, it's the only place that fits the vision, Chloe told me, her eyes glowing with a fever I didn't recognize. It's going to be featured in Vogue weddings. It has to be perfect, minimalist, young, editorial. I wrote the check. I wrote every check. The florist, the caterer who was flying in truffles from Italy, the orchestra. Total cost? $242,000. I thought I was paying for my daughter's happiness. I didn't know I was paying for my own execution. 6 weeks before the wedding, Chloe asked to meet me at a very trendy, very cold cafe in Soho. She didn't hug me when I arrived. She sat across from me, her phone already on the table, recording our meeting for her social media team. Mom, she began, and her voice had that thin, artificial quality that socialites use to deliver bad news. We've been doing the final floor plan for the ceremony. The seating chart is a nightmare. I can help with that, Chloe, I said, smiling. I've handled seating charts for heads of state. No, she said, cutting me off. It's not about the names. It's about the visual. The visual. Genevieve and the creative director have a very specific look for the front row, Chloe continued, looking at her fingernails. They want the modern European elite aesthetic. Everyone in the first 3 rows has to be of a certain age, a certain vitality. I felt a strange, cold tingling in my fingertips. What are you saying, Chloe? We've decided it's best if you don't attend the ceremony, Mom. The cafe became silent. Not because the music stopped, but because my world had just gone deaf. You're 68, Chloe said, as if she were stating a tragic medical diagnosis. The gray hair, the way you walk, It just doesn't fit the editorial spread. Genevieve says it will make the photos look like a normal wedding, not an elite event. So, I whispered, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long way off. I am uninvited? From the wedding I am paying for. Oh, don't be dramatic, Chloe snapped, finally looking up with a face full of irritation. We'll have a small private lunch with you a week later. We'll tell people you're traveling in Italy and couldn't make the flight. It's better that way. It protects the brand. Protects the brand. I looked at the girl I had raised. The girl who used to cry if I wasn't in the front row of her ballet recitals. The girl whose very existence was funded by the gray hair she now found so offensive. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just picked up my purse. I see, I said. Well, I wouldn't want to ruin the aesthetic, Chloe. Have a wonderful day. I walked out of that cafe, and for the first time in 30 years I didn't look back to see if she was okay. I spent the next month in a state of quiet surgical focus. Chloe thought I was traveling. She sent me texts asking for more money for emergency lighting and designer gift bags. I didn't respond. I had already paid the vendors, but I hadn't yet looked at the fine print of the Pierre Lowell estate. Chloe forgot one thing about her senile mother. I don't just book venues. I own the banks that lend them money. I called Peter Ashford my CFO. Peter, I said, the Pierre Lowell estate. Who holds their mortgage? 2 hours later I had the answer. The estate had been struggling since 2021. They had taken out a massive bridge loan from a private equity firm called Hudson Vane. Guess who owns 51% of Hudson Vane? The Morgan Arthur Holding Company. Technically, the Pierre Lowell estate belonged to me. Every marble statue, every manicured rosebush, every antique chair Chloe was so worried I would clash with. I looked at the contract. There was a dignity clause. A standard piece of legalese used by high-end venues to ensure that events don't ruin the historic reputation of the property. I decided to exercise that clause. Personally, the day of the wedding arrived. Saturday, June 14th. I didn't go to Italy. I went to a high-end salon in Manhattan. I had my gray hair styled into a crown of silver. I put on a $5,000 silk gown in a deep midnight blue. I put on the pearls Arthur had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I looked like an empress, and I felt like an executioner. I drove my Volvo to the Pierre Lowell estate. I didn't use the back entrance. I drove right up to the main gates at 2:30 p.m. The parking lot was full of Ferraris, Bentleys, and young beautiful people dressed in minimalist white and beige. They looked like mannequins. I sat in my car and watched. I watched Mark's mother, Genevieve, greeting guests. She was wearing a dress that I recognized. It was a knockoff of a Dior piece from 3 seasons ago. At 2:45 p.m., exactly 15 minutes before the editorial procession was to begin, I stepped out of my car. I didn't walk toward the guests. I walked toward the venue manager, a man named Marcus who I had known for 15 years. Marcus saw me and his face went white. Mrs. Bennett? What are you doing here? Chloe said you were in. Marcus, I said, my voice calm and low. I am exercising the immediate safety and dignity audit under the Hudson Vane mortgage agreement. Section 4, paragraph 12. Marcus blinked. Audit? Now. The wedding starts in 10 minutes. I am aware, I said. I have received a report of structural instability in the grand ballroom, and an aesthetic failure that threatens the historic reputation of this estate. Aesthetic failure, he stammered. Yes, I said, looking over at the front row of guests. It seems the event currently being held here is a clash with the dignity of the Pierre Lowell brand. As the majority shareholder of the holding company, I am ordering an immediate evacuation for a safety inspection. Marcus looked at me. He looked at the legal documents my attorney, Helen, had just handed him. He knew exactly what was happening. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Bennett, he whispered. Don't be sorry, Marcus, I said. Do your job. 3 minutes later, the fire alarms began to wail. Not the high-pitched beep of a modern system, but the deep soul-shaking bells of a historic mansion. The sprinklers in the grand ballroom, the ones that sat right above the $40,000 flower arrangements, began to hiss. I walked to the iron gates of the estate and stood there, my hands folded in front of me. The doors burst open. The modern European elite, came pouring out like rats from a sinking ship. Their beige silk dresses were soaked. Their minimalist makeup was running. Their vitality was replaced by shivering, screaming panic. And then came Chloe. She was in her $30,000 custom gown. The train was 6 feet of heavy, waterlogged lace, dragging in the gravel. She looked like a drowned swan. She saw me standing by the gates. She stopped. The guests were rushing past her, but she just stood there in the mud, staring at her mother. "Mom," she choked out. "Hello, Chloe," I said. "I thought you were in Italy?" Genevieve, the mother-in-law, came rushing up, her fake designer dress clinging to her like a second skin. What is this?" "Marcus says the owner ordered an evacuation. Do you know what this has cost us? The magazine crew is leaving. The aesthetic is ruined." I looked at Genevieve. Then I looked at my daughter. "The aesthetic was ruined the moment you decided a mother was a clash, Chloe," I said, my voice echoing off the stone walls of the estate. "You did this," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "I did," I said. "I exercised the dignity clause. Because there is nothing more undignified than a daughter who sells her mother's heart for a magazine spread." "You're a monster," Genevieve screamed. "We'll sue you for every penny." "You can try," I said, turning to her. "But I own the firm that would handle your defense. And I own the bank that holds your mortgage. In fact, Genevieve, I've been looking at your credit history this morning." Editorial in its disaster. Genevieve's jaw dropped. She stepped back into the mud. I looked back at Chloe. "The vendors have been paid, Chloe. The truffles are in the trash. The flowers are dead. And the Vogue spread? I called the editor an hour ago. I told her the vitality of the event had been compromised." "Mom, please," Chloe sobbed. "It's my wedding day." "No, Chloe. It's a photo shoot. And you didn't want me in the frame." I walked to my Volvo. Marcus opened the door for me. "One more thing, Chloe," I said, looking out the window as I started the engine. "Mark's family? They're not elite. They're broke. I've been subsidizing their lifestyle through 3 different shell companies for 6 months just to see how far they would go. I stopped the payments this morning." "Good luck with the marriage," I said. "I hear Mark is very good at aesthetic living on a budget." I drove away. I didn't look back at the white beige mannequins shivering in the Hudson Valley rain. But I want you to know what happened next. The marriage lasted exactly 4 weeks. When the money dried up, so did the vision. Mark's family was evicted from their estate 3 months later. It turns out, when you don't have a mother-in-law to pay the secret debts, the world becomes very minimalist very quickly. Chloe moved back to the city. She tried to call me. She tried to visit. She even showed up at the house in Alpine with a box of my favorite cookies. I didn't open the door. I had the housekeeper tell her I was traveling in Italy. I'm 73 years old now. I still have my silver hair. I still have my sensible shoes. And every morning I sit in my library and look at the photos of Arthur. I realized something that day at the Pierre Lowell estate. Aesthetic is what people use when they don't have a soul. Vitality is what they crave when they are dead inside. And me? I am very much alive. And I'm the only one who still holds the keys to the frame. Because some things, like a mother's respect, are not editorial. They are eternal.